Could someone tell me about your service learning project?
So basically what we did was we looked at students who study and work at the same time, so like work in paid employment, and the results that we basically concluded were the inevitable that students that work as well as learn, obviously they have less chance of getting as good grades and their attendance isn't as great. But one thing that we looked at specifically was like the effects of 0-hour contracts and how they're almost branded at students to be like the ideal sort of contract because they're more flexible, but also it leads to like anxieties around when do I have to be at work, will I actually get any shifts this week, especially with like the cost of living crisis. That's a big like major effect that it has on students at the moment, especially because it leads to that sort of uncertainty. So,
brilliant, thanks for that. So I know you did some research looking into the existing literature, and you made some really useful observations there, particularly around the 12-hour. Can you tell us a bit about that in the round?
Yeah, so we basically did a 28 source literature review, which kind of reviewed most of the scope, but what we found is that most of the literature was outdated, with the recommendation for students to work 12 to 16 hours, and that was the optimum time. Any more would then negatively affect your outcomes. However, they were all around 2010, 2015, and what we found that obviously the shift in the labour market and the massification of education all like mixed together, that actually needed to be lowered to fit like the demands of like contemporary society, and that with obviously the competition for hours, the sorting out your shifts with the unpaid labour, that should be much lowered, and it needs to be re-looked at within the context of precarious work today.
Brilliant. So I know when you looked into, and I think it might be linked to your own experience, but we can cut that out if you're not happy with that. Around like the tier, can you tell us a bit like the tiering system that happens now when you're on a 0-hours contract?
So yeah, with my own experience, I'm on a 0-hour contract, and a part of the deal is that you're put into like priority groups depending on how often you work. So it's kind of like in order to get shifts, you have to work. So if I were to ever take time off, which is one of the things they actually marketed it to me for, they were like, if you have like an exam season or whatever, just take time off and it'll be fine. But it's really not fine, because if I take time off, then when I want to come back, there's no guarantee that I will be able to even work. So yeah, it's that whole pressure like to just keep on taking shifts, and like Amelia said, it's like if you're constantly thinking about whether or not you'll be able to work. So yeah.
Yeah, and with those interviewed as well, 90.1% was on 0-hour contracts, and like that wasn't our sample of just 0-hour contracts. We just sampled sociology students, and that was what came out. Like, so that shows that the majority in precarious work is rising. So it's like the issue's only going to get worse.
And so, what kind of, thinking about the findings from your study, what kind of impact is that having on people's ability to study?
We found that they had a lot of intrusion of leisure time. So we found that a lot had like large group chats filled with all the workers, and that managers will put a shift in and it's first come first serve, or it's who the manager likes the best. So there's so much unpaid labour and intrusion of leisure time. We're trying to get the shifts, trying to be on your manager's good side, picking up the shifts so you'll definitely get them next week, and you can't possibly think about uni when you're trying to survive and fight for a job. It's like survival of the fittest, trying to get a shift in.
I feel like there's a lot of loneliness as well for people who work as well as study. Like, university is branded to be this sort of like massive social activity, and it's a big experience for so many people, but it kind of like takes the gamification away when you've got to work most of the time to even be able to afford to keep coming to university. And that's especially like since student loans just don't suffice people's rent, like they actually need to work to stay here.
Okay, so brilliant answers. So what's your hope? What is this project going to contribute, and what you're hoping might come from doing this project?
Just to like kind of spread awareness, make like the private trouble a public issue of precarious work, because there may be like people who think students are lazy for not coming to like their lectures and when they're paying, but really if you haven't had a shift in over 2 weeks and you get offered one, you go to work instead of uni. So obviously just spreading more awareness of the changing labour market. I was also thinking about some like help towards students, maybe some like financial incentives to those from like social divisions, because those of lower social class, ethnic minorities and women are more likely to be in precarious work and are more likely to work more while studying. It was also looking at with Nottingham University, this one in particular, bringing a lot of economic capital to the city, then surely the employers, and we could kind of meet somewhere in the middle to make sure that the students have some kind of safe working environment and aren't getting exploited.
Okay, so service learning then, were you able to make links with service learning with other areas of the degree, did you find? Was it useful in that way?
Yeah, I'd say so, definitely, because in my module, political sociology, we do a lot about like economics in terms of like different class structures and stuff like that, and how arguably like the state has less influence nowadays. But there's also a counter argument that we've done about that we've partially covered in this, about how much control like the government and the state do still have, and how it is still affecting people, especially when they can't afford to come to university anymore really, or like survive at university.
I feel like one of my optional modules, so education, there was a direct link there when like studying the context of like some of the assignments that we had to do, and I feel like doing this just made me feel like I had such a great kind of base and like loads of sources already at hand. And then aside from the context as well, I would say even with like methodology, like did you guys not find that writing the report, it really assisted in like having that kind of, I don't know, guidance and practice
and
already
also,
at hand.
doing this like service learning as well, it's kind of like set the base for like all of my essays for the whole year, that like I've focused really on precarious work, and like that's then what I want to kind of go on to in the future as well. So it's kind of like reminded me what I do want to do.
Brilliant. And so can I ask, just to finish off then, so it'd be an individual question, so what's the main thing you've learnt from doing service learning? So we could start here.
So I'd say, obviously, I like the fact that we've learned about this specifically, being someone who's learnt all the way through my university, all the way through A-levels, and I feel like it's really emphasised like inequalities in higher education and stuff like that, and I think that it definitely needs to be looked at more, because personally I felt it's affected my attendance, and I'd like for other people in the future to not have to worry about it as much.
So sorry, so you said learn through, do you mean you worked through that whole period? So,
Worked,
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
What I learned from service learning is like, obviously we do our normal content, but I've really learned how to conduct a study, from forming the questions, narrowing them down, actually finding the people to interview, then putting it into paper. So it's really just helped that whole process, from not the banking method, from like actually fully doing that process as a sociologist would.
I would say that I have learned how beneficial it is to like be able to firstly like choose a project that you're passionate about, but then also like immerse yourself in the studying rather than it all just being theory and like writing up assignments. I feel like it makes the work so much more enjoyable, and it's helped me like realise things I'm interested in, like Megan said, the precarious work topic. That's another thing that kind of was the base for a lot of my assignments too. But yeah, just how service, like, I think at the beginning of the year, I kind of thought it would be a lot less of, I don't know, I just thought it was kind of like an easy grade, or just something which was like, why am I having to do this? But the whole critical pedagogy aspect, and like being able to kind of take charge of your learning, I feel like I understand its value now.